Hey, how are you?
That's why we're working together.
I think it's worth asking these candidates. We need to know where they stand.
Hi guys, how are you?
I think your glasses look great.
Hello, hello.
How we doing? Hello. Hi. For only $1 million, you too can buy a politician. Good to be with you.
Senator Sanders.
Hey, how are you?
It sounded like a good idea 2 years ago. Go up to New Hampshire and watch the first in the nation primary, where all that we the people stuff we learned as kids comes alive. And for a moment, you can almost believe that regular Americans have a say in choosing the next president. Oh no, don't blame New Hampshire for that. And this is where my odyssey begins. A guy with a camera, embedded with the media, following the campaigns and the huge cast of characters that make elections both fun and frightful.
Go home! No more food stamps!
Yeah, no more free tuition!
So how did I become part of the media, covering a presidential election? Well, I quickly learned that a guy with a camera needed a press pass to get into events. So I set up a blog, printed business cards, looked the part, and was both polite and aggressive when I had to be. But this isn't some behind-the-scenes story of what happens in a campaign. Because who in their right mind would give a stranger with a camera inside access? But in the early days of New Hampshire, you can get that access.
I was with you at that parade.
Yeah.
And you didn't shaft me then either, so
I didn't.
don't.
I didn't.
You're a nice man.
I'm trying.
We'll be coming back to that parade incident later.
Simple point I'm making.
Governor, what about you complain about substance?
Hang on a second. Man, calm down. Is everything all right?
Fine.
Okay, good. Let him just checking.
But it wasn't always smooth sailing.
Who are you?
Good to see you.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm...
So as the real campaign outsider, I pointed my camera elsewhere. Like the dance between the campaigns and the media.
I'm kind of shocked. I don't know what to think.
We've grown to love each other.
It's mutual.
Or those rare reminders about what's at stake with elections.
We can't let her be stuck. No, I mean, look, think about that. Here's a mom. She's got a 31-year-old daughter. She's been fighting a disease since she's 2 years old. We need to find something for this lady.
But what really brought me to New Hampshire was to have a front row seat and to see if our hopelessly divided country could find some common ground to deal with the challenges facing us. Well, we know that didn't happen, and now our country is more polarized than ever. And during the 9 months I was embedded with the press, it became obvious that the media system, not so much the reporters, was incapable of thoughtfully covering national elections. Okay, that's not exactly breaking news. But because the media doesn't cover itself, we never see firsthand how the media sausage-making works.
Hey, Michelle. Yep, he's a minute out.
This mystery only reinforces the widespread distrust people have in the media. So I decided to cover them myself. And in doing so, I was confronted with an obvious question.
We have to even define what is the press, what is the media now. I mean, I'm part of what we call kind of the mainstream media. That's the networks, the big newspapers. Contrast that with what we have now, where you have 7,000 television channels, and that's just the beginning because we have all this digital media now.
Everybody is the media. That everybody who right now has a smartphone can be making videos, can be uploading to YouTube and Twitter and all these other things in ways that do not stop.
So what we call the media is more like an ecosystem, ranging from a tweet to the nightly news. And it is this ecosystem, this looking glass, that distorts our political realities.
As an information system, as an event that's supposed to take place with an informed electorate, it was, I think, as President-elect Trump would say, sad.
And as the destructive powers of technology weaken traditional media, a new anytime, anybody, anywhere media age has developed. And this transition between the immature new and the decaying old has created the conditions for an Orwellian world where alternative facts make us question basic elements of democracy like, is truth important?
Truth is important in everything. But the thing about a democracy is this. You cannot have the kind of democracy that we have in America unless citizens have access to independently gathered information. Accurate information is as important to a democracy as the right to vote.
So if truth is on the chopping block, what else is?
The last time we had a major transition in our institutional values, fabric, priorities was the agrarian age to the industrial age. The Industrial Revolution brought 2 world wars and a genocide. That's the risk we're carrying.
Wow. And I just wanted to have some fun following the campaigns. But instead I fell into this rabbit hole.
Governor,
so let's take a step back.
No, we gotta move back.
To 2 years ago, when this journey began.
Thank you very much.
I'm proud to be a New Hampshire voter because it is special. You know, the candidates have to get out there and they have to crisscross each other and they bump into each other at the local little clam dive or whatever. It's also good for the candidates, I think, because they see real people early before the media really take over and before ads take over. They actually have to talk to people and look at them in the face.
So how many people do you employ?
And I like that little marathon they have to do to begin.
Oh, my name's Chris. I'm actually sitting next to Rand Paul. He just wanted to say hello, if you don't mind.
I agree. Okay. You're a good man. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
Would you like to say hello to him? Have a nice day.
I think that's good for them.
Or good for candidates that can get recognized.
All right, we gotta go.
Okay. Who'd you talk to? Hey, how are you?
Hi, I'm Jim Gilmore.
Hi, I'm Eric. I live in Manchester.
Excellent. Nice to meet you.
Oh, you're running for president?
I am. I'm the former governor of Virginia.
Oh.
So nice to meet you.
Best of luck to you.
Thank you.
It was also a great place to watch how mainstream media practices are undermining their own credibility and contributing to the rise of the post-truth era. The day after announcing his run for president, Donald Trump's campaign began with a whimper. Surrounded by his staff and security, Trump was greeted by just me and an autograph seeker. Considered a carnival sideshow by most, his supporters had it all figured out.
When you have 10 candidates or 11 in the ring now, and multiple more to still throw their hat in the ring, you got to start weeding people out. But I have a feeling that the man we're about to see speak is going to do that all by himself.
The event also foreshadowed the many protests Trump would attract because of his rhetoric. But on this day, the Trump campaign didn't know how to react, something they learned quickly.
USA! USA! USA!
6 weeks later, at my second Trump event, the possibility of Donald Trump being nominated for president became real to me. I began to understand how Trump's 40 years of personal brand building and salesmanship, including 15 years of playing a successful businessman on TV, had captivated people into believing he was a political savior.
But we are going to make our country great again. We are going to do things with our country that are going to be so good and so smart and so spectacular, and we are going to be respected by the world again and not laughed at like we're all a bunch of stupid people being led by incompetent politicians. It's not going to go on any longer. We're not going to take it any longer. We're going to make America great again. Thank you, and I love you people. I love you people.
So, sir, what did you think of Donald Trump?
I thought he knocked it out of the park.
We need Donald
for president. He's number one. He's the man.
What did you like best about what he had to say?
Just completely unvarnished, unscripted, no teleprompter. He's kind of half comedian, half Nick Walenda.
Do you think they were there for Jeb Bush or Rand Paul? Rand, I've had you up to here.
What'd you think of it?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I'm even a bigger fan now.
What'd you think?
Oh my God, he was great.
Big fan now. Big fan. What'd you
Oh,
guys
yeah.
like most about it?
I know that sounds ridiculous. His performance. It was really like watching a performance. He's magnetic.
And it wasn't just the white working class voters that enjoyed the show. Here's Jack Beatty, a liberal commentator, after his first Donald Trump rally.
He's an entertainer first, and he's ironic. Even as he's professing something, he's mocking it.
Hey, you know what you do? It's like Elton John. You always want to finish with a strong song.
I mean, whatever happens in America happens in showbiz first, and I just feel the showbiz quality, and that even people that go to these things and applaud him, they're entertained as much as anything else. Yes, I wouldn't want to be a Muslim listening to this stuff.
Perhaps the best comment that sums up Trump's appeal and explains the final outcome of the 2016 election 14 months later is this.
I'm ready to err on the side of crazy instead of caution.
Only later did I learn he was a professional comedian. Of course, voters weren't happy on the left side of America either. And 3 weeks before Trump's first campaign stop, the burn was being ignited at Sanders' first major campaign rally in New Hampshire.
Hey, Bernie, how you doing?
It was hard to believe it was nearly 18 months before the general election.
It is truly my great honor to present a candidate who will be a truly great president of the United States, Senator Bernie Sanders.
And Bernie gave them what they wanted to hear.
And we're not going to let the billionaire class take it away from us.
So by the summer of 2015, it was clear there were powerful movements of voter anger on both sides of the political spectrum. But the news media avoided Sanders' campaign events. It embraced the chaos of Trump events.
Don't even breathe. We still got an hour.
I don't like to blame everything on the press, but the shiny thing of Donald Trump really got in the press's eyes. The press has a business model. You have to come up with a story. It has to be something new. It has to be interesting. And Donald Trump gave fun and interesting news every day.
But Sanders didn't get the memo about being new and exciting.
In America today, the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth
as the bottom 90%.
Rather than trying to cover candidates evenly or equally or even fairly, they've been racing towards what they know will earn them the most ad revenues. So Donald Trump had $2 billion in free media given to him. Bernie Sanders had a fraction of that during the same period of time, because the view was people were going to sell ads around Donald Trump and not so much around Bernie. Now that's a good way to sell soap, but it's not a way to make a democracy work.
Because of the disruption of the digital age, the business models that sustained quality journalism, that really paid for the good stuff, those are under attack or falling apart. And it's left news organizations scrounging for revenue in order to do depth.
For example, stories seldom reveal the character of a candidate.
It's very easy to talk to people who agree with you. Right. Not so easy to talk to people who don't agree with you. Right. But that's what our job is. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. That's called democracy, and we do our best.
Is the press like this for everyone? The press like this for everyone?
Yes, the good journalists admitted they missed the big story in the primary.
Nobody predicted that Donald Trump would have the staying power that he has, or that Bernie Sanders would too, on a different part of the political spectrum, but for many of the same reasons. And shame on us for not realizing that the divisions that were going on in Washington, the inaction that was going on, the inequality we're seeing all across America, both of economic inequality and opportunity inequality, would lead us to a place where Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee for the presidency.
But just 5 months later, even the good journalists couldn't learn from their mistakes.
We didn't properly gauge the strong desire for change in this country, and we dwelled on issues of the day, and what we entirely underestimated was just the fervor among a huge swath of voters to blow up the system and start over.
Apparently in journalism, you got to get hit over the head a lot to realize that you're getting clobbered.
And it's the need to chase the story of the day that brings us to the second failure of the political media. And that's focusing on the campaign process and horse race, and not the people and their problems. This priority is obvious when reporters ask questions to candidates.
Hillary Clinton's a friend of yours. Her number's been slumping. What advice would you give her at this point?
What would a debate between you and Joe Biden look like?
Advice for the Democrats tomorrow in the debate.
But questions that probe the big story of the election, the historic uprising that rocked both parties, was seldom asked.
On a lighter note, Boston Mayor Marty Walsh has challenged you to take the ice bucket challenge. Is that something you'll do?
Look, he's a clown, Marty.
Bush, he says he is not a good talker, he's a doer.
Jeb Bush says he's not a good talker. Why would he admit that?
Your good friend Steven Tyler is asking for a cease and desist order.
Most questions were about the horse race, even though it was months before the start of the race.
Recent polls showing that you're gaining in New Hampshire, cutting into Jeb Bush's support.
How do you feel you need to do here in New Hampshire to play out that long game?
First place finished, second. What do you think you need here in New Hampshire to keep going?
On your poll numbers, here in New Hampshire right now, how well do you have to do in Iowa to make it here?
Then there was the local media, who obsessed on keeping New Hampshire's primary first. As a result, they sucked up a lot of oxygen with questions like these.
Should New Hampshire have the first in the nation primary? We've seen the RNC float the idea of changing things up.
The Republican National Committee chairman has already talked about the possibility of this to do away with the primary in its current status.
Should New Hampshire continue to be first in the nation?
But with $100 million in TV advertising being placed during the primary, you'd be asking that question too. Of course, my editing could distort what really happened during these press gaggles, but a Harvard study found that nearly 90% of primary campaign news coverage dealt with the horse race or campaign process stories, and about 10% of the coverage dealt with the substance of policy, character, or campaign promises.
When you have a press that is so fixated on the daily ups and downs of polls, even just typical journalistic practices like horse race election coverage, that does us a disservice, and I think that readers notice that they're not getting the important information that they need from mainstream news sources. That's where I think a lot of the distrust is coming from.
And candidates sense this divide between the media and the voters, and it was brought out during this rare moment of self-reflection by one reporter.
Man, the Republican field has found some common ground when it comes to their disdain for the media of late. This isn't a defensive question, but where are we getting it wrong? Where is the media in general getting this wrong?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate that you would ask that question. I think the disconnect that I feel between the questions I get asked, particularly by the national media, and the questions that voters ask me, it is a gulf. It's a gulf. The national media tends to ask questions about the horse race or the headlines, and voters tend to ask questions about their lives. What's going on in their life? And what are your ideas for making their lives better? That's a big disconnect.
Now, here's something I put together to back up Carly's point.
What do you say to your loyalists who fear that you botched it last night and they're starting to walk away?
What you're going to do to help people get out of poverty, especially kids who are being set up to not have any chance in the future.
You bring a lot of people out, but you don't do as heavy of the retail politics, handshaking as a lot of the other candidates do.
Don't believe everything you read in the New York Times.
My question is about equal pay for women, and have heard, thank you. It's very important.
Dr. Carson, you had a phone call with Kanye.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm very curious to ask you as a neurosurgeon and not a politician about the Affordable Care Act.
You did mention last night that you had recently spoken to, you said, I spoke with Governor Walker a couple days ago. Can you tell us what you were talking with him about?
Why should I pay taxes at 73 years old so somebody can retire at 55?
I just finished my master's degree, and now during my job search, I'm told I'm either overly or underly qualified.
We'll see you.
Are you still going to get free helicopter rides?
What do you make of Debbie Wasserman-Schultz almost getting heckled by those supporters saying more debates, more debates?
And what you would do as president to take care of Citizens United or to get big money out of politics?
I mean, what we should be doing is stories about problems. I mean, we should identify problems that need to be corrected. Those are the kinds of stories that we can do, and then ask them how they intend to deal with it.
And voters shared scores of problems and concerns during the campaign, but the media had little interest.
Particularly when you think that we've been at war for 15 years, and we have all these candidates that not a single one of them has served in the military, that to me means that their priorities, their choices as individuals need to be examined. And the idea that they're suddenly, out there, on behalf of veterans and American strength, I think a key question for them is what have they actually done to make America stronger, make America safer, and increase America's standing in the global community?
Because for many, they'll be risking their life for the next president.
My unit's up for deployment within the next 2 years, and I wanted to know.
Others face life and death issues.
My son was just recently diagnosed at 12 years old with the precursor that will lead up to his colon cancer.
Then there was Victor Sims of Florida, who shared his experience of living in foster care since he was 3 months old. Jeb Bush was governor at the time, and Victor asked him a question to raise awareness about an issue very few of us think about.
You're moving homes, you're told to put everything you own in 2 black trash bags and then move to the next house. So that alone means everything you own is trash. If we can focus on the people and the children that are doing the worst or that are not privileged, that are being neglected in society, that as a whole in society we can do better.
But it's a lot more fun doing a story about a guy with a boot on his head.
Well, so there you have it, Vermin Supreme, Democratic candidate for president.
Certainly look forward to that shout out on your endorsement. I'm looking forward to the Chris Matthews bump. If I did not know better, I would be seriously convinced that I had a chance, because that is the kind of response I'm getting here in New Hampshire.
And in the tradition of Pat Paulson, political satirists soaked up the media attention.
A flower for peace, sir. For peace. No? But it's for peace. It's for your hair peace, Mr. Trump. For world peace. For world hair peace. World hair peace, Mr. Trump.
And I have to say, I enjoyed the entertainment.
Waterboarding Trump's former campaign bus, downtown Manchester, New Hampshire.
Come on, tell us.
How many bankruptcies have you declared, Donald?
Tell me about Rand Paul's platform.
You mean the one he was standing on during the speech, or
Exactly.
the one?
Yes, to make him taller. He actually,
no.
he almost looked.
He's my height.
He almost looked 5'5" on that.
No,
platform.
he's my height. Thanks a lot.
No, I love his hairstyle. It reminds
Yes.
me of a Labradoodle I once stood.
One issue many would say both the campaigns and the media handled well was the heroin crisis in New Hampshire. Seemingly out of the blue, if you believe the media, a deadly drug epidemic sprung up, with parents confronting politicians about their dead children.
A year ago, my stepdaughter died of heroin overdose. We already have 1,300 deaths already in the state.
I also lost a son. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
If you have somebody asking you a question and they're describing the death of their child or their granddaughter or something like that, you as a politician, you have to confront that.
With some politicians embracing the issue.
Every life is precious, and we have to make sure that folks who have fallen victim to this disease aren't looked upon by our society as if they have some moral failing. They just made a mistake.
The two issues that kept coming up over and over again, almost regardless of where I was, were untreated mental health problems and substance abuse.
The press felt they were on top of the issue.
Well, the governor of Vermont sent a warning shot to the country 2 years ago when he got up at a State of the State speech and said that the single biggest issue in his state was opioid abuse. That set us all off. It was on the front page of the New York Times, and it caused us to do some significant thinking at a place like the Boston Globe as to why the governor beat us to that punch.
But I have a different view, and to understand where I'm coming from, I need to make a disclosure.
It's having a ball. What do you do during the week?
But actually, I work on prevention with heroin.
You.
This was not a story that began in Vermont in 2014, but a national health crisis that's been festering since 2002. Ignored by both the media and politicians, the warning signs were there for all to see. By 2011, the CDC declared prescription opioid abuse, which has fueled the use of its chemical cousin, heroin, as a national epidemic that has claimed an estimated 200,000 lives. But for the last 15 years, the media and politicians have ignored this tragedy, while scaring the public about SARS, Ebola, and Zika. Yes, the media told the tragic personal stories, but they couldn't advance the story beyond that. Like how 3 candidates had family members die or overdose from drugs, highlighting how this epidemic crosses both class and racial lines. Here's one encounter that shows how common this tragedy is.
Yeah, sure. Don't forget about the drug problem. I lost my nephew. That's important.
And the media seldom added context, as they reported whatever talking points candidates gave.
You have to get people to understand the problems. It starts probably with OxyContin, from what I'm hearing. And you have to educate, and you have to do something very strong.
Drugs are pouring in. I'm going to create borders. No drugs are coming in. We're going to build a wall.
This is the kind of clarity voters get from the mainstream media. So it was up to citizens to ask the tough questions. And that's why Dr. Parker Dooley traveled from Virginia.
2 companies have been heavily implicated in this problem. One of them is the manufacturer of OxyContin, and they have admitted that they have lied about the addiction potential of their product. The second corporation that is implicated in this is a mega bank, and they have admitted to laundering money for the drug cartels.
But the crimes of Purdue Pharma, who lied to doctors about the addictive powers of OxyContin, and HSBC, the 4th largest bank in the world, who admitted to laundering nearly $1 billion for a drug cartel, was something most voters never learned about, because the media couldn't get past the basic narrative that New Hampshire had a heroin problem. Of course, I shared Dr. Dooley's concerns about Purdue Pharma, and I asked some of the candidates about it, only to get stonewalled. Remember John Kasich thanking me for not burning him? Well, let's light that match.
Well, do you think a company that's been pled guilty in federal court for misrepresenting narcotics to doctors, do you think that company should still be?
Well, I'd have to know exactly what we're talking about.
Thank you.
I just have to know. Okay, I'd have to know what it is, but if people are obviously endangering the public, they got to be held accountable. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Now, when you were a U.S. Justice Department, Purdue Pharma pled guilty to misrepresenting OxyContin. Do you feel that their $600 million penalty was enough, or do you think we should have been doing more to prevent that kind of abuse?
$600 million is a lot of money. So yeah, listen, there's just so much that law enforcement can do. We do the things that we can do. We act appropriately, and I'm proud of the fact that, we were able to bring those cases. But the way you're going to solve this problem is to get treatment for folks who need the treatment.
And it was Chris Christie's dishonest behavior and the media's lack of interest in it that was the low point in covering this issue. Christie positioned himself as a champion in the fight against addiction.
Throwing people in jail who are nonviolent drug users being stupid on crime is what it's being. And they need to get smart about it. And if they want an example, they can come to New Jersey anytime.
But just weeks before the primary, he vetoed a drug prevention effort in New Jersey designed to make it harder for first-time abusers, mostly teenagers, from abusing painkillers. Christie's actions really called into question the promises he made to these families.
Every death we can prevent is a gift we've given to that person's family and to themselves.
So this citizen journalist decided to become a citizen and ask him why. I was baffled by Christie's veto. It made no sense, and I wondered what role special interests played in this. But in a large setting, I started to ramble. And while you cannot see it in this angle, Christie was stepping closer to me, trying to intimidate me. It was working. Finally, I blurted out.
And so my question to you is did you take a dive? Did you take a dive on this? That's my question.
Turns out that one of the cameras in the room that night was from Showtime's political show, The Circus. And suddenly, I became a character in a story they wanted to tell.
He's not afraid to take the questions. He goes toe-to-toe with anybody who wants to give him a hard time.
And that would be me. Sure, I wanted to make Christie look bad, but not to embarrass him. I had plenty of chances to do that. No, I wanted to call attention to the promises he made to families, that he'd fight for them.
There are too many people, young and old, in this country dying unnecessarily. So keep up the fight, and I'm going to fight with you.
While at the very same time, he vetoed a common-sense prevention effort. But the circus, and the rest of the media in the room, only cared about the sizzle of the confrontation, leaving their audiences entertained, but clueless as to why I was yelling at Christie. In the end, families speaking out and demanding solutions was heroic. But after ignoring more than a decade of rising death rates, corporate culpability, and public health warnings, the media and politicians used the heroin issue as a campaign prop and then walked away after the election. While most in the media view the opioid crisis as the human interest story of the election, I didn't, so I was on the hunt for one. I always wondered about who those people were that politicians talked about meeting on the campaign trail.
A woman in Ohio on the brink of retirement finds herself one illness away from disaster after a lifetime of hard work.
That's the kind of story I was looking for. But with 50 reporters at any given event, all professional storytellers, the odds were slim of finding and keeping that story to myself. Well, not only did I find this story, but it evolved from a simple human interest story to providing insights into a leading candidate in the state of journalism today. So let's meet Brenda Bouchard in her story.
My name is Brenda Bouchard. My husband has younger onset Alzheimer's disease. My nearly 89-year-old mother lives with me, and she also has Alzheimer's disease. I'm one of 65,000 Alzheimer's caregivers in the state of New Hampshire. Alzheimer's disease receives less than $600 million from the NIH for research funding, yet Medicare and Medicaid spend $153 billion a year to take care of people with Alzheimer's. 1 in 5 Medicare dollars is spent on caring for somebody with Alzheimer's disease. The projections are by 2050, thank you, by 2050, by 2050 it's projected that 28 million baby boomers will have Alzheimer's. We need a commitment of $2 billion a year in funding to cure this disease. I know firsthand the emotional toll as well as the financial toll this is taking on families across the country. What we need to do to ensure that this devastating disease is a top priority.
It's a total top priority for me.
As well as the potential bankruptcy to Medicare and Medicaid get the attention it so greatly needs and deserves. Thank you.
I'm sorry, your first name is?
Brenda Bouchard.
Brenda?
Yes.
Okay. Brenda touched on a very important issue.
Now that's the kind of story I was looking for. Heartfelt, determined, and it spoke not only of her plight, but a national challenge for our healthcare system that will go bankrupt paying for care. And while it's always hard to tell if a candidate's reactions are real, I think Brenda's questions got them off their talking points, and we got to see their human side.
My mother has Alzheimer's. And, there's so many families that are touched by it.
And I, too, have seen firsthand the ravages of Alzheimer's. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, lived with it for 10 years. And it was, it's a tragic disease. It's a heartbreaking disease.
Thank you.
Well, first, let me thank you. Let me really thank you for your caregiving and your care. I want you to just think about what you said. 65,000 caregivers right here in one state. And multiply that many, many, many times over.
So I totally believe that we should be spending more than $600 million, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
I thought Brenda's story had real news value. Later I asked some experts what they thought.
Much more substantive story. It's a better story. There's real policy issues behind it.
I think that's a real good story, and I think that most people would want to read that story.
So I gave Brenda a call and asked her to share more about her story.
I'm motivated to get out in front of these presidential candidates because watching Ken go through this, seeing his pain, anger, and frustration throughout the course of the disease, but I'm speaking equally because of the pain, anger, and frustration I see in every single member of my support group.
I produced a video about Brenda's efforts to honor her husband Ken, and then the politics and relationships of a small state intersected with the digital age.
And my husband was friends with Bill Shaheen. He's Senator Shaheen's husband and also very involved in the Democratic Party. So I emailed Bill the 22-minute video one morning, and 25 minutes later I got an email back from Bill Shaheen saying, I'm going to reach out to the Clinton campaign and make sure they see this. So shortly after Bill Shaheen passed along the video, I got an email asking if I'd like to meet Hillary Clinton, and I said, sure, of course I would. So I was a little bit nervous about that, but I went, and I remember coming around the curtain to meet her, and she was just so gracious, and she had such a big smile on her face. But what I mostly remembered was that she recognized me. She remembered my story. She started talking to me about my husband and my mother.
They met in September 2015. And during the next couple of months, Clinton often added this to her stump speech.
I met a woman in Dover who's caring for her husband with Alzheimer's and her mother with Alzheimer's.
And somehow, in making this video, random forces helped me create the very story I was looking for. But there's more to this story.
Hillary Clinton rolled out her plan in Iowa. So the Sunday before the town hall meeting, Hillary Clinton's campaign got in touch. In that conversation, they said, I have two things to ask you, people's names and dates of birth, and will you introduce Hillary Clinton at this town hall meeting? And in the moment, I thought, well, I can't say no. I have to say yes, but I also felt like I cannot possibly, how can I possibly do this? I can't possibly do this. But I did.
Hello, my name is Brenda Bouchard, and I'm an Alzheimer's advocate. So during this presidential campaign, in our beautiful state of New Hampshire, we've had so many candidates come through. I have had the great fortune to be able to speak to many of them about their thoughts around Alzheimer's. Actually, I've been able to address 13 of them, to be exact.
Of course, like any politician, Clinton will say or do anything for votes. But as Brenda points out,
I started this advocacy work in a nonpartisan fashion, and honestly, I thought I would remain nonpartisan. But I asked 14 presidential candidates the same question. And yes, almost all of them were supportive. But the difference was, she put her money where her mouth was. She went to the work of thinking this through and putting forth a thoughtful plan.
so say what you want about Hillary Clinton and her many faults. Even with the accidental Billy Shaheen connection, Clinton didn't have to do this. For her efforts, the Alzheimer's Association named Brenda Advocate of the Year, in which Clinton singled out her efforts in a video statement.
I've been proud to have Brenda by my side.
But Brenda never wore a boot on her head, so the press had no interest in her story. Apparently, a major candidate who insulates herself from scrutiny, and then suddenly rolls out a campaign promise based on the plea of an average voter, has no news value to the scores of reporters, editors, and producers covering the election.
At one point, I decided, well, maybe I'll go and speak to some of the reporters. So over the course of these 14 town hall meetings that I went to, I did speak to quite a number of the press. And many of them frantically were taking down notes, and I thought something would come, that Alzheimer's would get some attention in the press. And to my knowledge, it never did.
Of course, the Clinton campaign didn't push this story either, ignoring the polls about voters who felt Clinton didn't care about people like them. They only produced a web video about Brenda's story, but spent tens of millions of dollars attacking Trump. And when you lose a close election, every decision is second-guessed, and this particular one should be. But enough with all the what-ifs, and let's look at some of the human interest stories that packed journalism covered instead of Brenda's. Of course, there was the opioid story, scores of profiles of the political jesters. Then there were the teenage twin sisters, who, like Brenda, also sought out nearly every candidate so that they could get a selfie with them. But during the last 2 weeks of the campaign, the most popular feature story was the tattoo studio giving away free Donald Trump tattoos. To learn how he earned his 15 minutes of fame, I visited Bob Holmes at his Clay Dragon studio to find out how he came up with such a great idea. But as soon as I asked Bob the first question, the story took another twist.
Some London, England newspaper, I think it's the London Gazette, was wanting to talk to me. And then when they started to leave, the girl asked me, if I ever done any Donald Trump tattoos. And I said, no, I haven't done any. I said, but I do them for free. So she put that in her article in London, England, and it just went crazy.
What was the next phone call? Was it from a customer, or was it from another media?
No, it was another media. NECN came over, Fox News came over, Fox International came over, Inside Edition, The Insider was here.
You didn't do a tattoo yet?
I didn't do a tattoo yet. Yeah, it was totally accidental. It wasn't anything. We weren't even in the interview. She was just walking out. It's really hard to work when, you got 9 different TV stations in here. You got everybody's lights, everybody's cameras, everybody has their own people interviewing. Sometimes there was 4 or 5 stations here at the same exact time. I just fell into it. I just said a little sentence and it went crazy, but it is weird how all of a sudden world news was about giving away free Donald Trump tattoos. World news. Which I do appreciate that it is.
And as a citizen, I personally feel so disappointed that it appears to me our press has gone for sensational headlines and what's going to draw people to read the paper or watch television, and not what the grassroots people out there attending these town hall meetings are talking about. And it's been incredibly disappointing.
The media needs to stop. It needs to reflect on its failure, and it needs to really think about how it failed to hear voices that need to be heard if American people are going to understand the big issues of the day. How do you go from this really pretty clearly broken landscape? Whether you view your politics from the left or the right, I find few people who disagree that the media is broken.
And let's not confuse media criticism with demonizing the media.
They are so dishonest.
Using their shortcomings as a weapon to undermine a free press.
You need to open the gate right now because you're illegally detaining a member of the media. Please open the gate.
Because to paraphrase Winston Churchill, the mainstream media is the worst form of journalism, except for all the rest. And remember, nearly every scandal, like Clinton's email server or Trump's personal behavior, was the result of the media doing their job. Let's try to make that the rule, and not the exception. Because much of what's broken is self-inflicted, like when they replaced news analysis with partisan cage matches. Remember this?
I made a special effort to come on the show today because I have, privately, amongst my friends, and also in occasional newspapers and television shows, mentioned this show as being bad. It's not so much that it's bad as it's hurting America. So I wanted to come here today and say, here's just what I wanted to tell you guys. Yeah. Stop. Stop hurting America. Okay.
If we were concerned in 2004 about the quality of our political discourse and the elevation of incivility.
Gentlemen, we can't hear you when you speak over each other.
If we were concerned then, we should be, in a five-alarm situation now.
The bigger challenge is the business model of newspapers. The lifeblood of accountability journalism is broken.
How we build and sustain news organizations that hold power accountable is a crucial and important question for the future of democracy. For decades, essentially advertising dollars have funded public accountability. You can't expect advertising dollars to do that anymore. There's just not enough.
Finally, the changing habits and perceptions of digital news consumers has contributed to the dumbing down of the media in our political debate.
Online, we curate our own realities by deciding who we want to be exposed to and who we want to let into our particular self-selected political information environment. So if everyone is being their own curator, being their own editor, you get to sort of figure out what version of reality you want to subscribe to.
The headlines are shouting, the videos are too fast. The approaches are very tabloid in their approach because you're trying to grab people by the lapels and say, listen to me. The journalism of quality, the kind that really tries to find signal and lock in on the big issues, is less and less and harder to find in a really busy time when all of us are swamped and we're all bombarded with too much media. And it's left news organizations scrounging for revenue, and scrounging for revenue often means chasing ratings or chasing traffic online more than you're thinking about depth.
The need to compete in an environment in which you're not competing with 10 news sources or 20 or 30, but thousands of different competing rivals for attention. People feel the need to be more attention grabbing, even for credible news organizations.
There's a bias to be interesting. There's a bias to be provocative. It's one reason why Donald Trump has been click candy through all of this.
And the way people communicate in the digital world is a lot different than the real world.
It gives an apparently safe space, not just to say things you felt uncomfortable about saying, but you can get really worked up and push it and cross lines we didn't used to cross. And that's what a lot of us are experiencing, as a loss of civility, where you may want to moderate how you talk with people so that we can work as a society that can talk together and make decisions together, and we're not doing that very well right now.
One of the most important qualities of a democracy, according to Aristotle, was deliberation. Thoughtful deliberation. And this social media that we have today, the immediacy aspect, the instantaneous aspect, has had, I think, extremely detrimental impact in terms of democracy.
And the advantages of connectivity has a downside.
It empowers all of us to find the other people with whom we agree, to create a community, to feed each other, to make our little bubble, and to feel empowered that we have truth, because after all, we have other people who agree with us and other people who see the same thing.
That echo chamber, as it's sometimes called, or the amen corner, has really made us all deaf. There's so much ringing in our ears from shouting on one side and shouting on another that we end up not being able to listen to each other.
Ultimately, we, the consumer, need to tame our technology.
You know, the digital world is effectively a public sphere without institutions, almost without norms of behavior. And that means that right now it's pretty chaotic. I also believe we have all the power to change that.
But we haven't. So the information system that drives our news and political debate has devolved into the post-truth era.
People tend to disbelieve information they don't like or don't already believe. We all do this. The problem we had this year is that we had a major candidate who was really undermining any notion that there is any piece of the press that is telling the truth. He asks us not to believe in any of the norms of the standard quality press. If you put that together with a tendency we all have to try to pick holes at information we don't like or don't believe, you get what has been called truthiness, that it's all just opinion, and the way you know something is true is if it feels right. And when we have that, we're really at sea with respect to any ability for people to learn things they don't already know, or learn things that at first blush may not seem right.
Today, the internet is a sea of truthiness.
Mixed in with the more traditional news, we have partisan outlets. There's always been some of that. But we also have fake news, news that's not real.
Some of the people studying this issue divide up the fake news into different quadrants. There are different slices of it. One of the slices is even satire. And some of it is just truly made up. And some of it is half-truth. But it's also just being spread because it's profitable. And by setting up sort of these news farms, they could make a lot of money.
But false information spread before an election is as old as democracy itself. Yet the fact that engagement with fake news on Facebook was greater than mainstream news is but one more example of how our political information system is broken.
Social media allows for people to seek out the kinds of information that they should be getting from mainstream sources. So when you have alternative, maybe somewhat questionable websites doing the sort of investigations that mainstream sources should, not that they're doing them well or providing accurate information at all, but when these kinds of stories confirm people's gut reactions or hunches about what's happening, we need to look at one of the major problems, and that's actual news.
In fact, these fringe news sites, quickly followed by the president,
You are fake news.
use the failures of mainstream media as a weapon to obscure and deflect their misinformation efforts.
So here, ladies and gentlemen, is the king of fake news, dun dun dun, Brian Williams.
The most infamous conspiracy story of 2016 was Pizzagate, about a massive pedophile ring run by the Clintons and the Washington political establishment out of a pizza shop.
Pizzagate is a really interesting example of the mess that we're in. So different journalists were working to debunk Pizzagate. But the problem was one of the readers of the debunking didn't believe it and decided to self-investigate what was happening. And he obviously went in, shot the floor, scared people. This was reported on then by mainstream news organizations. Since then, a lot of conspiracy and fake news websites are saying the person who went into Comet Pizzeria was actually a plant from the mainstream media, and according to them, it was a false flag, that this person was a plant by the mainstream media that would help them eliminate alternative media. And that's completely mind-boggling to me, that a debunking led to a dangerous situation, and then the dangerous situation itself became its own conspiracy theory involving the media. What do we do with that? I don't know.
Days after the 2016 election, Zimdar's experienced firsthand the instant, random, and broken political information system.
My students and I have been talking about journalism culture and sources. Some of them were citing questionable sources in class or in assignments. So I created a resource for my students to navigate news media because of the increasingly cluttered and complex world. A couple hours later, it was going viral on Facebook. Without even knowing it, the Los Angeles Times and New York Magazine reported on the document, and it started really taking off from there. a lot of different media entities started reporting on it without talking to me or doing any sort of additional background information. And so a teaching resource turned into a fake news list, which turned into a blacklist or a hit list. And that's because of secondary reporting based on a Google Doc. And then pretty quickly after that, some of the websites included in my resource started digging for information about me. So by creating a teaching resource, I became a liberal snowflake, a kooky lefty professor, a communist infiltrator from China, a government censor. But it was also interesting, some of these readers also decided to troll me. So it's unsettling to have campus police positioned outside your door because people are calling and demanding your office. People were saying I should be shot. People were saying I should be raped because I was trying to teach media literacy to my students. And so to me, it's really contradictory that my speech, based on my research, was problematic to them and therefore needed to be shut down. I wasn't trying to shut down any websites. I wasn't trying to stifle speech, but because they didn't like my speech, that was their solution, to try to discredit me and threaten me into being silent.
Zimdar has encountered a type of political paranoia that has long plagued American history on both political spectrums. It is this paranoia that fuels the growth of truthiness as traditional media grows weaker, creating a perfect political storm.
The paranoid style is a very important historical element. If you think about who's likely to have this paranoid style, it's people who feel left out. The action is going on somewhere else. These experts, these elites, they don't care about me, they don't talk to me, I don't know what's going on with them. When you think about that way, it's a rational support to a paranoid style. Why would you be paranoid? Because you think something's happening, it might hurt you, and you can't tell what's true from not. Digital media has done something very interesting, where once upon a time we might have a view, and if we didn't hear it in the press, or we didn't hear anybody talking about it, we'd think, gee, I might be alone. So if you get the paranoid style of people who feel out of it and people who feel like they've been left behind and are disregarded, and then you get what seem like thousands of other people agreeing with you, then it amplifies that paranoid style and creates pseudo-truth.
In the demise of newspapers in America's heartland has left a vacuum.
We are at a crisis point with mainstream newspapers, middle-sized towns, middle-sized to large towns across this country. In 2004, 1 reporter in 10 was based either in New York or in Washington. Today, that number is 1 reporter in 5. And there's a big part of this country which is simply not getting the news.
And we were warned about the rise of this radical fringe in American politics.
You know, when people get nervous and frustrated, and a lot of us are, right? Our wages are stuck, our kids have big debt and can't get a good job, it unsettles us. So there have been times when people have become very unsettled and they've gone to movements that are not representing the best of us. There was a movement in our country against the Irish. There were movements in this country that were anti-Catholic. The party that came up from it was called the Know-Nothings. We've all learned about Joe McCarthy. And remember, he had that list, but he never really had the list of known communists. And what I'm saying today is, I get a sense when I look at what's happening in our country that we have the potential to start another movement here that doesn't represent the best of us.
While a vast majority of the Trump and Clinton voters represent the very best in America, we did elect a president who embodies this culture of conspiracy and paranoia. And it should surprise no one that Trump was mentored by Joe McCarthy's right-hand man, Roy Cohn, and his victory was celebrated by hate groups. This is what happens when a stale, broken, and mistrusted media crashes into the worst economic meltdown in 80 years, in a country with a long history of political paranoia and conspiracy movements. Then, add a new medium that instantly connects, amplifies, and empowers different realities. You begin to understand how many Democrats believe that Bernie Sanders was beaten up by Clinton campaign staffers, or understand why nearly 75% of Republicans still doubt Obama's citizenship, or why an estimated 45 million voters, both Democrats and Republicans, believed in Pizzagate. It also explains the distrust Americans have for scientific consensus. So here we are, the oldest democracy in the world, having conspiracy theorists set public policy. And who should we blame for all this?
You know, we've seen the enemy and he is us to a great extent.
I love watching videos of puppies, but in fact, that should not be the only thing I watch.
We all need to start reading what we're sharing. So if we're just a little bit more cognizant of the stuff that we individually share, that can go a long way towards preventing some of the more egregious misinformation from spreading.
So we have to push back on ourselves and say, as a responsible citizen and as someone with media literacy, I'm going to look and evaluate and be critical of where my news is coming from.
But are we media literate enough to understand the 50 shades of truth? Do we know which sites use two sources before publishing or run corrections? Are you reading original reporting or opinion? If opinion, do they link back to their sources? And what kind of news was a tattoo story? It certainly wasn't real news, but it wasn't fake news either. It was more like mutated news.
We are now getting more information than any people that ever lived on the earth at any one point. But the question is, are we more informed, or are we just overwhelmed by so much information we can't process it? Right now, I'm afraid we're a little bit overwhelmed.
What we really need to do is break down those walls where we have a sharing of those views, but there's a respect and responsibility to listen to those opposing sides. You might learn something.
But what kind of ways do we have for Americans to come together and actually struggle for that hard thing in democracy, which is to talk to each other, though we care passionately about things and disagree?
So you've got to break through those silos and then try to find something that I think is representing with the very essence of communication, and that is commonality.
We're looking for common ground in a really fragmented universe.
But there is a lot of common ground on both sides. Like there's too much money in politics.
Unlimited money by unknown people is a formula for disaster, and it's just a matter of time. It'd be so easy for a foreign government to set up a shell company in America and that money flow through to some super PAC. It's coming.
But we can't stop demonizing, where half the country are elites and the rest are racist.
Diversity of viewpoints creates stronger solutions and actually frequently more lucrative solutions. And so the degree to which we self-select and self-sort and only live near people who are like us, it makes our communities weaker, for sure. And so what's required for us to really understand that in our bones and to act differently because of it? Well, I don't know. That's a very hard question right now. And so that's why in the short term I only see it getting worse.
On that point, I certainly found a lot of common ground.
I'm afraid I'm pessimistic. I think we're in a very difficult time.
I don't know. I don't know. I want to be positive, but I feel like right now all of the evidence, the actual evidence, supports the contrary. I feel like we're on a very dark path.
And even more importantly, how do we get to a point where people actually care about a truth that is not just about what feels like something I'm familiar with?
That's a tough one. I mean, I don't see any short-term pressure release valve on the polarization. It's going to continue to intensify for the short term.
We tend to distrust the good intentions of people we disagree with politically. We think they're bad people or they're evil people. They're doing these things to hurt us, that they don't have the best interests of the country at heart. And that, I think, is problematic. Then it's easy to create scapegoats, and it's easy to demagogue in politics.
And so I'm afraid I don't have a happy ending to my part of the story.
As for the rest of the story, like my campaign buddy said,
Let me tell you, there's so much going to happen. If you don't have a seatbelt, go get one.
I think we have a lot of chaos ahead. And it doesn't have to be bad or painful, but it is going to be chaotic because we have to figure out a new way of doing things. And that's always hard. The Industrial Revolution required us to rethink everything from monarchy to roads and transportation to old age and retirement. And I believe that the information revolution requires the same kind of fundamental rethinking of how the country works, how the world works. But that rethinking is, carries a lot of danger with it. It's a dramatic double-edged sword. And only if each and every one of us takes responsibility for it, can we get through it. Because we cannot trust it to just a few handful of leaders. There's no leader talented enough in history to take us through it.
But is this a bold prediction or Chicken Little nonsense? Mele has a track record, so I asked him to read from his 2013 book, The End of Big.
Wow, this is nuts. We do not yet know if 5 or 10 years from now we will find ourselves in leadership not merely incapable of handling or preventing national crises, but also haplessly or intentionally creating new ones of their own. The old way of nominating leaders is not working. So it's time for all of us, regardless of party, to get involved and to get creative. Together, we must build new institutions, consistent both with our common American values and the realities of our technology. When I was writing this book, some of my friends who read it, 3 years ago I was writing it, some of my friends who read it said it was too dark, too grim, things weren't really that bad, our institutions couldn't possibly be that fragile. And yet here we are.
But even with darkness in our lives, another day will come. And while many will accept their fate, others fight on.
I am here because Alzheimer's costs more than $200 billion annually.
My hope for the future is built on kind of a foundational belief in American ingenuity, that we really are we have a culture of great plasticity, a culture of great inventiveness and experimentation. And that's what we really need right now.
If you're a democracy, everybody has to pitch in. It has to be a grassroots effort. That's what the internet and what social media could do.
We at Ground Truth are talking about trying to support a new generation of journalists who understand digital media, empower them with old school values of how you do great reporting, in-depth, on the ground, fair, balanced, nonpartisan reporting, but reporting that doesn't cower from connecting the dots and saying something clearly, and really take advantage of the moment we live in, which is a revolutionary one, but recognize that the old school values have to come along with this revolution.
Maybe we've abdicated our power and responsibility a little bit. If we really believe that they're in the age of the marketplace, that there's nothing we can do to make information both attractive and good for you. I think that that's an abdication of responsibility, right? And I think that's a lazy way out. There has to be a way.
You don't like the two parties? Start a new one. Get involved in a local party. You don't like the way decisions are being made in a giant bureaucracy you deal with? Try and imagine a way of fixing it or changing the institution or starting a competitive one. I mean, every day Americans are stepping outside of their old existing institutions and starting new ones. Sometimes it's schools, starting new schools. Sometimes it's starting new political parties. But one of the problems we have in America is we have very little imagination about what's possible. And in fact, everything is possible. Everything's open to be reinvented. But we have to bring that to our world.
So there's no need to call for a revolution. It's already here. The question is, who will shape the future of this revolution? The same old interests of the last 30 years?
There are too many serious people who have simply turned away from our political process because it's become so odious and so money-driven.
Or will technology be marshaled as a tool for democracy that can reshape our institutions to be more responsive? Because we can't assume these new institutions will embrace our basic values like equality, free speech, and a free press.
Yeah, I think the media is the opposition party in many ways.
Especially when a strong man occupies the White House.
Which is why I alone can fix it.
It's a very high-risk, high-stakes game, the way he is playing it. It's full of a lot of uncertainty. It purposefully obscures meaningful dialogue. It invites ugliness, and that's a dangerous state of affairs.
So we know what the challenge is: to rebuild our political and media institutions for a new age, in a time when anti-democratic forces are on the march. But right now, the solutions are unclear.
Schools have a really important role to play here.
There's a lot of opportunity in the nonprofit sector to find foundation money or individual supporters who get how important it is that we figure this out.
Nevertheless, there is that ever-present sense of optimism that we can meet any challenge. No one person or group can reshape our democracy. Only we, the people, grant others the power over us, either through the ballot box or the cable box. And we need to accept that we, the people, got us to this point. Finally, there's another story the media fails to tell, and that is the common ground that most Americans share, like how we pass down our civic values over generations.
Donald Trump.
Someday you're going to have to get out of that carriage, and someday you're going to have to walk out.
Senator, what was your first political march?
Oh, gosh, a long time ago.
Or people who want to pull the country together.
Compromise is necessary. You don't abandon your principles, but if you want to get something done, there has to be compromise.
Or can connect with other Americans they don't know.
Even though I'm from another part of the country where it's more diverse, it's still good to know that people in another state see some of the same issues the same way that I do.
People who can talk through differences.
And no one of us is as smart as all of us, so I think it's really unfortunate that we don't listen to each other and pay attention to what other people care about.
Liberals and conservatives who have their priorities right.
I mean, we all have one cause today, to get out the vote, so no need to have, there's no purpose for us to sit here and fight anymore. That's right. We just want people to vote.
No matter who they vote for, just come out and vote.
People who understand the value and reward of civic involvement.
You can go to your town hall meetings, you can get involved, you can volunteer, and you just have to step out and do it, and the rewards are wonderful. Like how it's benefited my life and how the quality of my life has gone up by being actively involved in the community is just great.
More importantly, I met people facing real challenges, who are fighting to improve not only their lives, but the greater good. And if we can stand together on this common ground, as we passionately fight for our beliefs, our democratic legacy will survive. But if we continue on the path of demonizing each other,
With the liberals, and I despise them. I have no use for them.
our future won't reflect our long-held democratic values. Ultimately, this story is but one chapter in our history, so we don't know how this story ends. But here are a couple of questions that will determine the ending. Do you think our American democracy is important enough to save? And if so, what will you do to save it?
Stay tuned.
Sorry. John Kasich's a man with a plan. John Kasich's a man. John Kasich's a man with a plan. He's got a big old van. John Kasich's the man. He's gonna fix America with his buzz. Oh, John Kasich's gonna fix it, never for buzz. Oh, John Kasich's a man with a plan. John Kasich's a man with a plan. John Kasich's a man with a plan. John Kasich's the man. America!